Welcome to the bar. We are very glad you're here. You're actually just in time because we're going to have another one of our, well, I guess the first one of our bar side chats. We're going to be talking about a very controversial yet praised part of writing. To offer us some more perspective on the matter, we are joined by my very good friend, Robbie. Robbie, go ahead and say hi for us.
Yo, what's up, pretty people? What's
That's
up?
that's my Robbie right there, also known as Robs on the internet, or those of you who have seen the streams. But yes, Robbie is very well experienced in the writing profession. Robbie, how long have you been writing for?
Um, that's a complicated question. I'd say started seriously writing like novels and such when I was like 16, so I'm 22 now, so about 6 years of like serious novel writing.
Dang.
I'm currently aiming to get one of my novels into publishing, and I have a couple of published short stories, aiming to get one of my novels into publishing. Aiming to publish a couple other short stories, and then also working on a new novel to try to also get into the publishing.
That is
Okay, the
that is
publishing pipeline.
awesome. Yeah, I know about some of those books, but that's really cool just how much you're working on. But yeah, so very excited to have you on to talk about this because this conversation actually arose on one of the streams. It was one of the longer ones. We were doing Sea of Thieves, and it really it came up just as something that we want to talk about because listen, I'm a level with everyone. I'm a level with you. I'm gonna trust y'all with this information, but I have watched an anime or two in my day. I know, terrible, terrible. But
Crazy news. Never would have
despite
guessed.
despite that, or I guess,
Anime, you.
but I guess in that realm comes the topic of today's discussion, which is the self-insert MC. You know, it's notorious in animes and some other shows where it's just people are always doing the self-insert MCs, and I kind of wanted to talk about like how that fits into writing, if you've ever seen anything like that, and so on and so forth. So I've prepared some questions for us right here. I've got them written down right here because I'm so very, very
All right, all
prepared.
right.
And we're gonna kind of move through these. They're not like interview questions or anything. They're just gonna be like things we can kind of debate because I have thoughts on this. You have thoughts on this. People in the
Cool.
comments probably have thoughts on this.
Let's
At
see.
least I hope they do. But I guess a way to really start out this whole conversation is we need to find the term. So, what actually counts as a self-insert character? What defines it? You know, is it someone who's relatable? Is it someone who's a blank slate that you can throw yourself on? Would it be considered a game character, like a silent game protagonist?
So the thing about self-insert, it's actually a good question because it's a little bit hard to pin down. Since to some level you're supposed to insert yourself into all main characters. Generally, though, when we talk about a self-insert MC, what we mean is that it's the author inserting themselves into the character and essentially writing themselves as the main character.
Hmm.
And usually, when we're referring to self-insert, we're also referring to self-insert characters that self-insert that are also a power fantasy. So, so like a power fantasy is essentially any story where it provides some experience that like people want, right? That people want, wish they had, right? So, for example, GTA 5 is very much like a power fantasy game, right? It's the power fantasy of kind of ultimate power, right? You can take any car, you can get a ton of money, you can have all the cool guns, you can escape the law, you can do all these things, right? It's and this is true for a lot of games are like this, right? A lot of video games. Call of Duty is also some level of a power fantasy, right? Of you're this cool badass soldier,
Yeah.
and we see power fantasies all over the place. Even like you could argue that like Harry Potter is to some level a power fantasy because it is because it's sort of the fantasy of going to this mysterious school and having magic, right? And learning magic. Usually, though, when we define a self-insert MC, we're referring to a character that is the author, either the author's putting themselves into the story, or what the author projects the reader is going to be like putting them into the story. And then that combined with the element of like a power fantasy, right? That's a
Yeah.
self-serving story. Usually with a power, and then usually this is also, of course, where we get into the issues of the self-insert MC, right? Which is that oftentimes they're very unsatisfying because they're built to be a power fantasy first and a interesting, relatable character second. Sometimes we end up with situations like Kirito, right, where they get weird powers and weird abilities, and there's no tension, and there's all sorts of issues that arise with this. But I'm sure we'll get into that as time goes
Yes,
on.
we've got questions down there about that, but you raised some good
Yeah.
points there because a lot of the issues with the self-insert MCs stem from the side of things of like the power fantasy. And by that, what comes to my mind are a few different movies. The first one is gonna be The Wolf of Wall Street and John Wick. Now, I wouldn't say
Yes,
they're for sure self-insert, but I do think those movies work
they are
because
power
people want to
fantasies.
be like them. For example, I watched The
Yeah,
Wolf of Wall Street,
exactly.
and it was a good movie.
You
I
want
was
to be Jordan
entertained.
Belfort.
Yes, but there's nothing
Yeah.
else really going on. There's not really like anything else to really grasp on. You're just kind of in awe of this character and like someone's living this life that's so cool. That's, in
Well,
my
Wolf of Wall
opinion,
Street is a
where
little
it comes
bit,
from.
yeah. Well, Wolf of Wall Street also has like two other aspects to it, but we can get into that or not if you want. Um, Wolf of Wall Street specifically, it's a power fantasy, but then what makes it different from like what we're talking about is that Wolf of Wall Street is based on a true story, right? Jordan Belfort's a real guy. The movie script was based off of real FBI files,
Really,
and
I
real
actually didn't know
interviews with the
that.
people. Yeah, like there were like FBI agents who watched it to, like and like confirmed its like accuracy. In fact, it was actually described as being too tame and not as crazy as the real deal was.
Dang.
Right, but Wolf of Wall Street was based off of real events, based off of a real person. Jordan Belfort is a real guy that does interviews. He's a pretty prolific figure on the internet. Um, Famously, the guy who kind of popularized the "sell me this pen" gimmick, which is like kind of like the fake business bro
Oh, it's so fake. It's
go
so fake.
to.
I had someone in
Yeah,
my this is off topic, so we'll move past it fast. But I had someone in a business class try and do that to flex, and I don't think they knew that we all knew it was from that movie. But anyway, that's besides the point. That's besides the point.
yeah,
The
of
other,
course.
the other, the others, the other
The
side of
other,
that is gonna be that John Wick side, and I feel like a lot of those action
yeah,
movies work for that reason. There's another movie that came out which I don't remember the name of, but it was about a guy in World War II killing Nazis the same way that John Wick did, and both those movies work not necessarily because the action's good, not necessarily because the story's good. John Wick's story is kind of weak. It's about that power fantasy of John Wick or this guy taking out all these people in a kind of unrealistic way.
so I think that there's okay. So real quick, going back to Wolf of Wall Street, there's one other aspect that also kind of crosses over to John Wick, which is that both of them are character exposés, which means essentially that like a character expose is kind of a type of story. It's not a super common one. We've recently seen one with if anyone watched Marty Supreme in theaters, that's another example of a character expose. Um, but Wolf of Wall Street notably is also trying to show this character of Jordan Belfort, and so is John Wick to a lesser extent, right? It's trying to show this character of John Wick, right? We're trying to see this person, this Baba Yaga figure, right?
Mm.
Also, John Wick is notable for some other. I would say John Wick is interesting because it's somewhat of a complex power fantasy as well, since John Wick is more portrayed in ways that we would traditionally depict an antagonist rather than a protagonist. Um, but yes, these are all examples of power fantasies.
Moving on, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the relatability of a character beyond just self-insert, because a lot of people say that self-insert is just a really relatable character. So I raised the question here: is relatability necessary for a compelling protagonist? Because a lot of
Yes.
movies go for that, and that's why you choose a. Just hit it with yes, but that's why you choose. Like in film school, they taught me that the first thing you do is you choose your target audience.
Yes. So I would say that this is so. Okay, give me a second to think. Okay, so first off, yes, characters have to be relatable, especially your main character has to be relatable for them to work. Or at the very, or if they're not relatable, they have to be sympathetic.
Does relatable
So
mean
essentially,
likable? Does relatable mean likable?
no, no. So usually when you have an MC, there has to be a way for your viewer or your reader or your player to connect with this character. And some mediums have it easier than others. But almost always, this means that they either have to like the character, or b empathize with the character. They can be either one, ideally both. But for example, a lot of characters start out as relatively normal people, right? We see this with, for example, Spider-Man. Peter Parker starts out as a somewhat unpopular high schooler, right? Somewhat unpopular, nerdy high schooler, which is a archetype that many comic book readers can relate to and empathize with. Notably, Peter Parker is also a good example for this because he's also very likable. Peter Parker's whole thing is with great power comes great responsibility. This is an incredibly likable and admirable stance to take for how to handle the situation that he's in. So, so yes, and ironically, this is also where self-insert MCs start to fail. But I think that we'll get into this as you continue the question.
Yes, yes, yes. Because the next question is actually We've got two ones back to back here that we can kind of we'll hit them in quick succession. Well, I guess it's less of two questions and more of one kind of combined question. But in my own little head canon, the way that I see it, how self-insert MCs really started is with those fan fictions. Those fan fictions all kind of started with people writing their
Yeah.
own original characters, throwing them in, writing them on dates, stuff like that. And that kind of brings me to the question of why does self-insert characters in media bring such a stigma, and is that really necessary?
Okay, here's where we're gonna start getting to the hot takes. Okay, so to start, yes, fan fictions and self-insert MCs have a long history together. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the term Mary Sue, right?
Yes, 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 yes. That's actually a term that came
Are you
up when I
familiar
was
where that
doing
comes
a
from?
little research on this. But Mary Sue is basically a character that is like too perfect, right? And my favorite example of that
Yeah.
is Rey from the new Star Warses. Yeah,
Yep, Ray, the dead horse that the fucking internet keeps beating.
yeah.
Anyways, um, is she a bad MC? Yes. Do we still need to harp about her in the year of our Lord 2026?
We
Probably
don't, but that
not.
was just something I could
Anyways,
bring up there. I mean, come on, man. Like
yeah,
it's too
of
easy. They're
course, of
setting me
course,
up
of
here. Setting
course.
me up here.
Of course. Okay, well, but either way, the term Mary Sue comes from this literally the start of fanfic. So, well, fan fiction has been around since the beginning of human history. We
Yeah.
have fan fictions for the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example. Um, however, or famously, Dante's Inferno is fan fiction. However, the fan fiction as we see it today kind of came up in the I believe it was the 1960s and 70s, back when Star Trek was it was during a gap between the Trek shows when there was very little Star Trek had become popular, but there was very little new Star Trek content coming out. So what fans do, they started making their own. And famously, one of them made was a young girl who made a fan fiction starring a character named Mary Sue, who was who paraphrasing the start of the book, Mary Sue was the youngest cadet to ever graduate Starfleet Academy, who like rescued a ship and the story literally starts with her having saved Kirk and Spock, right? And everyone's like, and everyone, even Kirk is in love with her. Every single major character of the of Starfleet is trying to serve her and make her as happy as possible, right? It's like the epitome of like this is like what someone wishes that they were in this universe,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, this short story got a shit ton of backlash, which is why, and this is where the term Mary Sue came from. It's named after this character. Uh, Obviously, Mary Sue, the term Mary Sue itself has a bit more of a complicated history. But there's plenty of video essayists that will do it better than me. There's a long history of it with sexism, and with like poor movie critique, but also with valid movie critique. It's a large subject that frankly way too large to get into here. But after fan fiction itself, so I think that fan fiction here, I think that a lot of people hate fan fiction. I can understand why. Fan fiction oftentimes is very smutty. It's usually not particularly well written. That being said, I actually really dislike the stigma against it. And against the stigma, I think there's a strong stigma against fan fiction and smut as a whole. And well, yes, fan fiction definitely does have some bad has had some bad legacies, right? 50 Shades of Grey was a Twilight fan fiction. That's a blow against fan fiction for all time, right? However, I think that fan fiction is also a really valuable form of literature. It's a way for people that don't traditionally write to become writers, and
But
that's
how do you
really
think
valuable. It's a legitimate artistic form that people who don't write can learn to write. And there's a ton of authors as well who have gotten into writing through fan fiction.
but what do you
I'm
think
blanking on the
about
name,
the
but it's
way
Sasha's fan fiction.
what do you think about the way that those fan fictions have kind of caused self-insert MCs to be like more noticeable? Because a lot of people write them that way because the fan fictions are their way of like contributing to the world. I agree that fan fiction overall has helped with writing and getting more writers in. I think those are valid points, but I just ask about with that specific trope because I feel like fan fictions are also really good at bringing in more tropes, especially the one we're talking about today.
So I think that fan fiction. Okay, so it depends on which literary tradition are we following. Because if we're talking about more like animes and stuff, it's a slightly different. There's
We're
different.
talking about everything, but obviously when you're talking about this topic as we are today, it's gonna fall more in that anime side. But I don't want to single out that specifically necessarily because people write self-insert MC Harry Potter fan fiction as well and other stuff like that. So I'm keeping it broad.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that this is kind of a complicated question. So first off, it's worth noting that yes, it definitely does contribute to that, and that fan fiction authors do oftentimes can oftentimes write like more self-inserting characters as time goes on. That being said, with at least within the that being said, I don't think it's the fault of fan fiction itself that there we see this rise in self-insert MCs. So and I think largely we can really blame this is going to be cringe to say, but we can really blame capitalism, right? So essentially, so the way it kind of rose in the East, specifically, is that they people realized that it's that having a wide base of kind of dedicated fans is not that profitable, right? If you have so say you have take a show like can't think of a show off the top of my head with like super wide, like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, right?
Yeah.
Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood has a very wide fandom. Almost everyone that's watched anime not only has watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, but puts it somewhere in their top 10, right? It's a show with a super wide, spread out audience. That being said, when was the last time you saw a Full Metal Alchemist figurine? When was the last time you saw a Full Metal Alchemist t shirt,
Ooh,
right? When was the
that's
last
a good
time you saw
question.
Full Metal Alchemist merch? Um, so essentially, what people in Japan realize is the same reason why, like for example, Japanese light novels tend to have such long names. It's because they realize that people don't read the backs of books. And it's more effective to put the back of the book at the front of as the title, right? In the same way, they kind of a lot of Japanese publishing houses realized that it's a lot more profitable to make a show that isn't that popular, but the fans who does have it run really, really, really deep.
Yes.
So essentially, the reason why we see so much saturation of fanfic of self-insert MCs within the Japanese market specifically, and the Chinese market and the Korean market in turn, is because their goal isn't to make a widespread audience. Their goal isn't to be popular. What they want is they want to appeal to the specific fantasy of a specific audience of like a specific maybe like 2 to 3 thousand dudes who will buy really expensive figurines, all the merch, the body pillows, right? All of those things, and that's kind of the target audience. And so the result is that what we see is we see a constant churning out of media where it's all these self-insert MCs with female MCs and female side characters that have various very hyper specific fetishes, right? That's why we see like a dragon lolly who's like actually 3,000 years old, right? It's because some dude in Japan really, really, really wants a dragon child that he can fuck. So I
I
wouldn't
didn't
say
know a lot of
it's
that, but that's actually a true thing because in my business classes, we kind of talked about this, and it's one of the things you're talking about. You're talking about a whale, and it's actually how mobile games make money as well. Because mobile games, they don't
yeah,
care about the millions of people who play it casually or play it
exactly.
free. They care about those people who are dropping every paycheck. Truly incredible answer to that last one. That was really exciting to hear. A lot of expertise there. We are running out of time here right now. Unfortunately, this first episode has to be a little more rushed than some of the later ones will be. But I'm going to
A
open
little
up the
bit of
floor a little
improv
bit.
casting.
Yes, I'm going to open up the floor a little bit here to you if there's anything you want to add before we finish for today.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things with self inserts that is like important to note here, which is that one. So the first thing is that when in regards to these power fantasies, I think a lot of times where they're taken really poorly, and the times where we see the most hate for them is self inserts. Where they're used towards the means of like sex as an object, right? So
Mm.
notably, like I mentioned before, with the Japanese ones, with the like, with the all the different female MCs and female characters that are kind of just like built to be like someone's fetish. We also kind of see that a lot with Western writing and smut writing, right? A lot of writings of smut are also self-insert. Though notably, Western smut does actually have some like pretty good variation. Um, but we
This
also see a
guy's an
lot of like
expert.
self-insert characters. Of course, of course.
Yeah,
I actually did once get a job offer to write smut, but unfortunately that fell through. But the like a good example is what's her name, Bella from Twilight, right? Is that in that she's very much like the right. So like a good sign that a character is a self-insert is when they're described as like a normal girl or a normal boy, right? Or just like your average high school kid, right? That's probably a good sign they're a self-insert. Either that or they're just like a character that's meant to be extremely relatable in a genre, in a drama, right? But if they're described as a normal kid and the story is not a drama, then they're probably self-insert. But also, it's worth noting that self-insert isn't always bad, right? There are ways to do self-inserts well, and they have been done well. There are tons of movies where the main character is just the director putting themselves into the movie. Same thing with books. There are tons of books that's just a that are just the author inserting themselves. Boshoku Tensei is a really good example. Like if we want to go to animes, like I mentioned before, Boshoku Tensei, Rudius Grey Rat is very much meant to be following the tropes of a self-insert MC. He's a loser neat who dies doing something like kind of virtuous. He's a little bit, he does lack some of the self-insert qualities in that he's so heinously bad at the start that he's a little bit hard to put yourself into. But even so, he's meant to be insertable for a very specific segment of the population. And Rudius is one of the best main characters in the anime. He's a legitimately flawed character. The issue that people have with self-insert MCs isn't necessarily that they are self-inserts, but more what they do to the stories that they're in when they're done poorly.
Mm.
Right? The problem that people have with self-insert MCs isn't that they're isn't that they are self-inserts. It's that, or not, and it's not that they are relatable, right? It's that usually when people put self-insert MCs to preserve the fantasy of them wanting to be in that story, they make it so the MC has very few challenges. And the problem is that if you have a main character or any character that has very few challenges, they end up not being that good of a character, right? If you look at like almost all of like the best characters that people love, right? Like again, for example, like Batman, right? Batman or Spider-Man. Actually, Spider-Man is the epitome of a character who just like repeatedly gets beaten down, beaten down, beaten down. That's what makes him a good character. And you can trace this to like every single character that's ever been loved in any medium ever. They're all of them, almost all of them, are going to be defined by this process of getting beaten down and then rising back up, because that is what we want to see in our characters. That's the whole point of a story. It's they overcome challenges. We're watching people overcome challenges, and that's what we find admirable. And the problem with self-insert MCs is that they want to sell you this fantasy so much that they forget to make them characters, and they forget to give them meaningful challenges, right? And that's where we get things like Kirito and SAO randomly getting this like his random god mode GoldenEye boost, and
Yeah.
suddenly being able to take out his enemies, right? That's where we see every single freaking isekai MC getting like overpowered abilities in the
Mm.
first two episodes, because they want to make these characters as unchallenged as possible so that people want to be in that character's shoes as much as possible, rather than making them go through the pain and the drudgery and the difficulty that you have to do for an actual character, right? There's a joke amongst authors that we love to traumatize our characters, right? That there's no such thing as an author as a character that like an author comes up with that doesn't have like PTSD, like childhood, like parent, mommy or daddy issues or like scars, right? There's no reason for that. Those make compelling characters, and self-insert MCs lack that, right? That's not universally true. There's definitely self-inserts that face meaningful challenges, but even amongst those, right? Like a good example might be like Trish from Divergent. Trish from Divergent never really faces challenge if memory serves. Obviously, it's been a while since I read that book series, but good example of a Western self-insert MC where she kind of just like goes through the story and has her love interest, and most of the threads of the story comes from her relationship with Four and whether or not they'll work out. And obviously, that's a whole nother branch and topic. But regardless, that's the issue of these self-insert MCs. They don't face challenges, and because they don't face challenges, we don't have a reason to care.
Dang. That is, you couldn't see my reactions during that because you can't see it, but I was like visibly reacting over here. There was a lot of great points in that, a lot of good mic drop moments. You know, not to be corny with it, but that's the topic. That's the words I would use.
Let's go.
But yes, thank you so much for that. That was a lot of good content there. We really covered everything that I wanted to get through with this kind of characterization kind of talk. This is only episode 1 of that. I want to do a full
Yeah, I'd be
series
happy
where
to
we
revisit.
yeah, where we keep talking about this whole writing and characters and media and everything like that. Because I think it's important to really understand it, because a lot of influence, like you said, fiction can be very powerful and how it like affects people and changes things. So I thank you for joining us
It's a
today.
reflection of our reality. Yeah. I think that the important thing to realize is that fiction is a reflection of our reality, that these are works made by people for people, and they're always going to have elements of both the creator and the audience in them.
Yes.
And that's important.
But yes, thank you for stopping by the bar today for a quick chat and a quick drink. We appreciate it dearly, and we will see you guys soon in Barside Chats too. Thank you guys.